This episode of Next in Queue marks the beginning of Season 2. Welcome. While Season 1 focused primarily on the career arcs of people in and around CX and the contact center industries, Season 2 will bring more focus to specific topics of interest from experts around the world. We'll be covering topics like recruiting and hiring, training, coaching, quality, new technologies, gig CX, digital transformation, mental health, chatbots, managing costs responsibly, and so much more. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast app and rate it. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. And hey, if there's a topic you want me to tackle, drop me a message on LinkedIn. As for today's episode, I'm joined by Amy Smit, Vice President of Effortless Experience at Challenger. Amy has been involved in best practices research and implementation her entire career and has been focused on effortless experience implementation since 2016. In this episode, we touch on what is and what isn't coaching, barriers preventing effective coaching and how to overcome them, communication styles, building a coaching competency framework, identifying behaviors and skills to develop, developing bench strength, and the most impactful and easy thing you can start doing tomorrow to improve your coaching. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Welcome, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here, Rob.
I am too. Today, we are going to talk about coaching, and we're going to get in depth into a few topics as it relates to coaching. But before we do that, I want to learn a little bit more about you and how you got to where you are today. So fill us in a little bit on your career arc and what you did before Challenger and what you've been doing at Challenger.
Well, the cool thing is I've actually always been in the Challenger brand family. So since college, I graduated and I started working for Corporate Executive Board, which then got sold to Gartner. And so Corporate Executive Board was a best practices research firm. We did research on basically every functional area of a business. So the contact center was one of them. Learning and development was one of them, corporate communications, marketing, IT, all of those different functional areas. And I actually started in client services for IT. I remember when they said, we thought you were the best fit for IT. And I was like, oh, I was an English major. That feels like a rough move. But it was really more about the client services piece and serving customers. And so we then were acquired by Gartner in 2016, and then Challenger spun off from Gartner, and that's purely because Gartner really wanted to stick to that research based offering, essentially, and we were at that time more in implementation services. So I had joined the Effortless Experience team in early 2016, actually, before the acquisition. And I joined it purely because I had read the book when it came out in 2010, had always liked it, and then learned that we were actually turning it into implementation services and thought I really want to get behind that. Even though I didn't necessarily see myself working in contact centers, I thought so much of what we're teaching and training in are these great life skills. It's things like flexing communication styles. It's things like coaching. I think about myself personally, and I had my first direct report when I was, the ripe old age of 23 and didn't have any resources. And I think about how much a program like this would have helped me be better at developing people.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons that you and I connected was I felt like we shared a lot of common interest and had very similar passions about really developing skills in people and coaching. And so I was really excited to have you on the show so that we could really take a deep dive into this because I wanted to present something for the audience where we could take a topic and really just kind of dig in. And so that's what we're going to do today. So you're a lifer with Challenger. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what Challenger has to offer? Because I know it's not just what you're doing today.
Yes. So we have two different areas of the business. What we're better known for and why we're called Challenger is the Challenger sales methodology. So Matt Dixon and others wrote a book when they were part of CEB called The Challenger Sale, as well as writing The Effortless Experience. And so part of the business is very focused on, again, implementation services for adopting that Challenger methodology into your sales framework, as well as other offerings kind of associated with that. Things like how to come up with a really good insight or negotiations handling, things that are part of the sales strategy. And then we have the Effortless Experience team that is geared towards customer service training. And all focused on the methodologies in the Effortless Experience book, things that lower the customer's perception of effort, lower your customer effort score, which we were kind of the founders of the customer effort score. And again, we do kind of a three-legged stool approach to that lowering effort strategy. A lot of people are just focused on like, okay, I need to train my reps, the people talking to the customers. And we say that's a great start. Yes, absolutely. Think about like building out from just a soft skills program, because who gets excited for soft skills training? So a more kind of experience engineering type training program to teach them how to lower the customer's perception of effort, but it can't just be this groundswell from the reps. You need to train supervisors on good coaching, and you need to think about your quality assurance program and what they are evaluating. So are they actually evaluating the right behaviors that will also, again, lower the customer's perception of effort? You have to come at it from all angles to really develop that strategy on lowering customers' perceptions of effort.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's get started. And let's start with, I'm going to let you pick, but I think I'd like to start with what is or maybe isn't coaching in a contact center. So maybe let's start with what isn't. What are some examples of things that you see commonly that people think, yeah, this is coaching, but that's not coaching?
Yeah. So this has been something that I've talked about a lot in the past couple of years, because I think it's the number one reason why coaching and good coaching doesn't happen, is because there is this kind of misdiagnosis on what coaching actually is. And I think the biggest thing that people think it is just I spent time with my people. So check that box, I coached. And the reality is, like, supervisors, they wear a lot of hats. They sometimes have, as many as 25 direct reports. And so it's hard to think about, like, how am I going to have these true, meaningful career development conversations? I need to be a mentor. I need to be a performance manager. I need to be a trainer. I need to be a wellness monitor. Sometimes I just need to be a friend. And so they're wearing all these other hats and spending time with their people. And the one that sometimes just gets neglected is coaching, because they don't have a true definition of what coaching actually is. I think the one that probably gets kind of misconstrued the most is performance management. So when you're giving feedback, like I did it, I managed my staff. I told them what they shouldn't do anymore and what they should do. So I coached, and that is performance management. It's not actually coaching. It's not really truly taking a specific skill and thinking I'm going to work with this staff member over a period of time to really hone it. I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to continue to ask them good questions about how it's going. I'm going to make sure they're invested in it. And that's what true coaching really is.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about skills, right? And a lot of times what I have experienced in contact centers is not because anyone's trying to do the wrong thing, but the focus tends to be on the metrics, the performance, the end result of whatever skill set someone possesses, and not on focusing on the skills, right? It's, well, you need to get your average handle time down, right? That's not a skill. That's just a measure of all the things that you're doing and how long your calls typically take or how long your interactions typically take. And what you're doing is saying, hey, we need to focus on a skill, and not just we'll do it once, we'll practice it, okay, you're good to go, and then just throw you to the wolves and we don't talk about it again.
Yes, couldn't agree more. And contact centers are such data-rich environments. We talked to one client recently who she was like, "We've got spreadsheets for our spreadsheets and dashboards for our dashboards." And I think that has caused a certain amount of, like, with good intentions, laziness with supervisors sometimes, where they say, I reviewed the dashboard, so I did a thing. But being a good coach requires you to be a little bit of an investigator on thinking like, okay, this is what the dashboard's telling me. What are the behaviors that are actually driving these? Average handle time, for example, it's a metric we say proceed with caution, because you want them spending the right amount of time with their customers. But certainly those dashboards are going to show you where there's anomalies. Amy is only spending an average of 7 minutes and Rob's spending, 16 minutes. What's going on here? But if you just go to Rob and say like, hey, you got to get down to 7 minutes like Amy, that's not actually helping anything and giving anyone any direction and how to improve. But if you do the sleuthing and, you listen to a few calls, you might discover, okay, what's really happening is that we talk about different communication styles here at Challenger a lot. Rob's an expressive. He loves to form a connection with his customers. He's also potentially should work on active listening, because, he's asking for a lot of things to be repeated. Those are two really great skills that we can work on that are going to help that end result metric that we're looking at. So that if we work on those, it's going to start to go down. And then maybe we tackle a third skill later on down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about some of the barriers that exist and why. You talked about it a little bit, right? Supervisors have lots of hats that they wear, but what are some of the other reasons why in some contact centers there really is just a lack of quality coaching happening?
Yep. I've said this before, but the supervisor job, it's really hard, candidly. And I think there sometimes is a little bit of sloppiness in defining the role, where we kind of throw everything that needs to get done, and there isn't like a specific function for it at the supervisor. So we all know, they might be managing 25 people, but they also might do project work. Sometimes there isn't a specific escalations team, so they're the escalations team. Sometimes there isn't a QA team, they're the QA team. And so sometimes it's frankly just time, where again, they don't have enough time to almost organize their day They know they have one-on-ones throughout the day with those 25 people, but they also have all these other things that they need to do. And so they don't have time to prepare for what a meaningful coaching conversation could be, and to do that sleuthing, to think about good, purposeful questions that they could ask about these development opportunities that essentially get buy-in from the rep that they do want to work on these development opportunities. So time, definitely the biggest barrier, 100%. I think the other is definitely the accountability issue. I think we talk a lot about supervisor coaching success at the supervisor level. But similar to what I was saying before about like training reps and hoping it's going to be this groundswell, we don't talk about the accountability as it goes up the chain. We just expect, we've hired people who are going to be good people leaders. And we just cross our fingers and we hope. So I think accountability for coaching it's this term that gets thrown around. And we almost think if we say it enough, it'll happen, but we don't actually build out structures of accountability. And I'm really big on that. So what are your mechanisms for making sure good coaching is actually happening? Because if not, what inevitably happens is those supervisors report into a manager, and the manager might occasionally say, hey, how are your coaching conversations going? And that supervisor says good, and that's it. Like that was coaching accountability right there. Rather than getting really meaty on like, what am I looking for to make sure that Rob is a good coach? So we advocate for almost like a quality program for coaching for supervisors, a competency framework that allows coaching to not stay this nebulous term. It's really defining here are the competencies that go into being a good coach, performing a really good root cause analysis and knowing what development opportunities are the right ones to focus on. Having that conversation with your staff member where you get buy-in, where they're really sold on this is the career development that's going to make a difference for me. And making sure that they're kind of not coaching to everything that they see, that they really know how to really not boil the ocean and focus on a few things. And other pieces of kind of a good coaching framework. So building a competency framework around that so that if a manager is observing coaching conversations, which I absolutely advocate for, they have a language with which to evaluate it. Because if you don't have that language, like they're kind of shooting in the dark a little bit and saying like, that looked good. Maybe it wasn't as good as Rob's last week, but I'm not really sure how to define that. So putting a language around it. And having a way for people to kind of move up from like, okay, I'm a new coach, I'm a novice. Maybe in 6 months I'll be emerging on some of these because I know what I'm supposed to do now. I know how to continue to hone my skills at doing a good root cause analysis. And my manager knows how to coach me on it. They have an actual good framework for coaching the coach. So that's one of the things I am a big advocate of, but it doesn't work for everyone. So I think the thing is like truly spending some time brainstorming what those structures of accountability could look like. We have a coaching survey that we give to reps so that they can actually assess their supervisor. And that's another great kind of starting point where you can have all this aggregated feedback from your reps on here's how Amy's doing in her coaching. She actually is telling more than teaching, and that's a problem. But, she can maybe show progress before the next coaching survey if her manager knows that that's what Amy really needs to work on. So.
Yeah, I love that you talk about the accountability. And I think, right, there's the old saying, right, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And that's one way to create that structure. But I think it's important too that people think about how they document things, because if all you're doing is just checking the box, I coached Amy today, that is not accountability, because again, we don't really know what that looked like. And so thinking about how you document coaching sessions and what the outcomes of those are is another way to create that structure that you're talking about. And
Yeah, we had a client who a lot of the technology that's out there for kind of workforce management has coaching codes that you can put in. And the first client who told me like, oh, we're so excited about the coaching program we're doing with you. We're putting in a coaching code. And I was like, oh, that sounds a little big brother. Tell me more. And the more that they told me, the more they sold me on it just being such a great idea because it signals that they're making space for it to happen. And that it's an important thing that they're tracking. So it tracks the time spent. You can also write in like qualitative notes so somebody can actually review what happened. And this particular client beforehand had said that a lot of their coaching conversations were like, oh, I got my direct report and we went on a walk around the campus. It's like, okay, well, what did you guys talk about? Oh, how our weekends were. Like, friendship is obviously important, obviously very different from coaching, and ensuring that people are doing the best work that they can do each and every day.
right. Yeah, I have always been a big believer in scheduling all of that out. I mean, part of what you talked about is one of the barriers is that time. And we all know that people are going to have fires to put out, and sometimes things aren't going to your calendar is not going to play out the way that you anticipate it. But having that plan of this is how I'm planning to go into the day and manage my time can be a really valuable thing because it serves as a reminder to say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to coach Rob in 30 minutes, and I do need to prepare for that if I haven't done that, or I need to quickly refresh myself on what it is that we're going to talk about in that coaching session. So that's just another way that you can help overcome some of those barriers that exist.
And part of our coaching framework, we talk a lot about the one-on-one coaching. And that's what we see most of our clients before they're true clients say they mainly do. So we call that scheduled coaching. That's where, it's on the calendar. If you're in the office, you're actually taking them into your office, having a off the floor conversation. But we very much advocate for the majority of coaching after that to be integrated coaching in the workflow, on the floor, sidejacking virtually if you're virtual right now. And we've gotten a lot of questions on, well, we're virtual right now. How do I still do integrated coaching? And to your point, Rob, like if you are scheduling it, and that doesn't have to be a secret thing. Like I'm going to not even tell Amy that I'm sidejacking for a little bit. You say very transparently, I've got some time on my calendar today to observe you. Before you jump back in the queue, put yourself on that coaching code, or just don't jump back in the queue. I promise you have permission. Let's have a quick conversation to make sure that we are making some progress on those development opportunities that we talked about last week in our scheduled session. And that way it's this ongoing development. It immediately impacts the next interactions that rep has that very day, because you can kind of remind them about what those development opportunities are, ask them some good questions about how they think they did with them in that call that you just observed, and then have them kind of move on with that new self-awareness and some new stuff to try in the next call that they get on, or text or email, whatever channel they're serving.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that you brought up that I'd like to dig into a little bit is just how we position how we go into coaching, particularly that engaged coaching while someone is actually performing, right? And we're observing. I know a lot of agents feel a lot of pressure when, right, somebody's just going to be watching me. There's some added pressure to that. How do you suggest that supervisors, team leaders, whatever the name of their role is, how do they mitigate that pressure by how they set things up?
Now, I think the first time that you do some of that integrated coaching, it's just the key to the kingdom is a very transparent conversation where you say like, I'm trying a new thing. It's about like me trying to help you first and foremost. I'm trying a new thing. I would love some feedback because it's going to feel a little clunky. Like, let's just put that out there. So if you have that moment where you just say like, I know you might feel a little awkward, but I'm here to help you. I might feel a little awkward because I'm trying this new thing. I'd love you to give me feedback and let's just try it. I think that is the key to the kingdom, like I said. And I think, once you've done it, we get this question a lot, like, well, won't they be on their best behavior? I'm not going to see the development opportunities because, they're going to be having this halo effect. I'm just an angel while Rob's watching. And my favorite response is like, well, is that a bad thing? Like you get to reinforce like, hey, we were working on active listening and you just did an amazing job. Here are 3 things that, I think you did really well with. Here, what do you think you did really well with? Like, let's keep it going. Keep this train moving for the next people that you're dealing with. So it's this chance to still stick to those same development opportunities that you've agreed to work on together, but to actually reinforce the good, which I can't stress enough is part of coaching. It's not always feedback and you need to do this better. Sometimes it is saying, here's what was awesome about that. And I can't stress enough, if you see something else that's a development opportunity, sit on your hands a little bit. Don't go bring it up because that's where coaching becomes very overwhelming for people. If you say like, I'm really here to observe these 3 things, 2 things, 1 thing that we've agreed to work on together and you stick to that, it keeps coaching very positive. It keeps it accessible. And it ensures that, there's just this true focus. When you start coaching to everything that you see, coaching becomes a very negative experience for your reps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that people recognize, right, when you are engaged in coaching someone, ultimately what you're trying to do is change a behavior, which is likely a habit. And habits are hard to change. And so when you talk about reinforcing, right, that good behavior, improved behavior, that improved skill that we're looking for, that's how you change a habit, is consistently coming back to that and giving that little dopamine hit, like, good job, right? That's what we want to see, even though that's not what you were doing before. When we started working on this, now I'm seeing it. And that reward is what will lead to a more permanent change in that behavior versus not doing that, because it's so easy to just fall back into bad habits.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's switch gears a little bit, because we've talked about this adjacent. We've talked about this, and that is, right, keeping focus and working on skills to improve performance for people. But I think one of the hardest parts is, particularly for newer supervisors, is how do I go about prioritizing what to coach? So what's the approach for that you've seen that works?
Yeah, and I think it's such a good question because I think there's probably very, very different answers based on each rep. So sometimes it will be very obvious. Somebody has 15 development opportunities, and you have to pick the ones that most directly impact the customers, the ones that are maybe the most kind of egregious for that customer experience, the ones that will give you the most gains on your KPIs that you care about. And focus on a few at a time, and keep kind of cycling through. Like, once you check one off the list and say, they've made tremendous feedback, let's celebrate that and let's move on to the next thing, because I think we can continue to make you again do the best work of your life each and every day that you're here. For others, especially we get this question with tenured reps, they've been here for 10 years. They know how to do the job. They're kind of just going through the motions at this point. How do I get them excited about a development opportunity? And I think that's where that scheduled coaching interaction is incredibly important to get their buy-in. Because sometimes it'll be obvious, and sometimes it's something where it is essentially like, what are the career development skills that you want? And maybe those take priority a little bit more, where you're kind of trying to make sure that they stay engaged. If there's someone that you want to keep, but like, okay, they're pretty good with customers, I can't not coach them, because then they will leave because they'll think nobody cares about my development. But maybe it's more of an open change conversation where they get to be much more a part of it, in choosing those skills that we're going to work on together. And think about what a great experience that'll be for that rep to say, my manager still really cares, and they're going to try to find opportunities for me to stretch in some way, to keep defining, what I should be working on, what I can be working on. The other question that we get sometimes is, they're a brand new rep. They have like tons of stuff that they need to work on. And I do like to point out again, like we said, supervisors wear a lot of different hats, especially with newer hires. Sometimes you will be focused more on feedback and performance management, mentorship, training. And then it evolves slowly into you putting that coaching hat on more. But in the beginning, it's okay. You will do more telling than teaching, because that's just kind of the career stage that you're in with that particular direct report. So I think it's important to, again, kind of be a little bit savvy with like, what are all the activities I need to be doing with the direct report, and when should I do each of them, and make sure that I have a very specific definition of what coaching is and when I'm wearing that hat.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that when you talked about that tenured employee who may be very high skill, and you're trying to keep them engaged, I mean, leveraging those employees for peer coaching, the model of what good looks like, right? That's another way that you can really engage them and continue to challenge them to take something to the next level, but in a way where they're demonstrating for someone that maybe is a little bit lower skill, but still kind of a peer.
Well, and we actually focused on this in a recent coaching webinar that we did with Matt Dixon back in June, where we talked about one of our original case studies of taking some of those tenure reps and almost giving them a bit of a coaching rotation to do, or I guess it was a coaching rotation. For one, you're kind of building the bench for future promotions, so that's a huge win. You're giving them something new to do. That's a huge win. And I'm going to go back to one of the first questions that you asked me for, like, why is good coaching not happening? And I completely forgot to share the other most obvious thing is, for the most part, we promote from the ranks of these reps. We assume and hope that they're going to be good people leaders, and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they would be a better individual contributor. Sometimes they would be better in QA. Sometimes they would be better with a complete career change. So I think something where you are giving them a little bit of exposure at the rep level when they're ready is actually going to help you and them figure that out, so that you're not wasting time in what that bench should look like. And they're not wasting time in figuring out what their next career move will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have that, I think one of the things in an environment where there is lots of good coaching is that it is a little bit self-sustaining, right? Because as an agent, I receive quality coaching. I know what that does for me. I may even get excited about it. And if I move into a role where now I get to be the coach, I've had that good model. Mm-hmm. And at the same token, right, if I'm in an organization where we don't really have any of that structure built, if I am the person that then gets promoted into that role, I don't have that role model of what what that good coaching looks like. And yeah, that we usually we throw them to the wolves and say, well, good luck.
And I think it's kind of the biggest reason that I think people who do our coaching program are successful. They've essentially said, like, we want coaching to be part of our DNA, part of everything we're doing. We want to make sure leadership really understands what it is and how to coach the coach. And we want to make sure it's something that is part of our daily activities, and can be sustained over time, so that, you know, the reps are seeing what good coaching is right from the get-go. As they transition potentially into a people leader position, they go through the program, they understand a really good framework for coaching. They've also seen it in action. And you get ahead of all those bad behaviors that people leaders just develop over time. So.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about one tip that we haven't talked about today. If you had another tip that you just wanted to throw out there to help organizations be better at coaching or help individuals be better at coaching, what would you throw out there?
You did not prepare me for this question, but I have an answer. And it's like it's difficult, but the most impactful, easy thing that you can start doing tomorrow, and that's start using really good open-ended questions in your coaching conversations. So when you get that rep talking, or if you're a manager and you get that supervisor talking and you're not asking questions that can easily end in yes or no or fine, and you really help them start to think about those development opportunities, or again, as a manager, start to have the supervisor thinking about how they're approaching coaching, self-awareness builds, and that's really that first stage for making gains on a development opportunity. So once you have kind of that, we call it a handshake on development, where you kind of have created self-awareness. They're kind of thinking now, gosh, yes, I really am not a good listener. I need to work on this. And then you say, like, let's start tomorrow, and I'm going to observe you on a few calls, or I'm going to have a triad with you on your coaching behaviors with one of your direct reports. Who would you like me to observe with you? It's definitely the first step. So really good open-ended questions, avoiding why questions for sure. So that would be a really good first step. I think the other thing that I've touched on a few times is just more transparency, way more transparency. And, like, you know, I'm here to help you develop whatever skill set you want to develop. So we are going to be working on these things together, and not making it seem like it's just, you know, something to be concerned about if you're going into these scheduled coaching conversations and they don't know what to expect and it feels punitive. Transparency can definitely go a long way with that.
Yes. You brought up something, and I think I should reinforce this, right? The triad, right? Where I've got, I'm being coached and my coach is also being coached by their supervisor, right? So they're kind of that manager, team leader, agent, coaching event. It is really important that you set that up with the agent so that they know what's happening, because man, if an agent walks into that and they see their supervisor and their boss's boss,
Terrified. Yes.
they are terrified. They think they're about to get fired is what they think. And so if you can, right, nip that tension in the bud before it even starts through transparency and just saying, hey, you know what, during this coaching session, Amy's going to sit in with me. She's not observing you, she's observing me. She's going to coach me afterwards. That helps the agent understand a couple of things. Number one, that they're not in trouble, and that this isn't going to be one of those conversations that ends in them looking for another job. But number two, it reinforces that we all get coached, and coaching isn't you're performing poorly, thus you get coached. It's just that's how everyone improves is through coaching. And even I get coached, and this is what that looks like.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to be kind of Pollyanna about it and say that's not a big hump. The rep is still going to feel uncomfortable this first few times, but if you make it a norm and it really, again, becomes part of that coaching culture where everyone knows that everyone's being coached on something, it's not seen as, you know, it's really like we are doing a service to our people if everyone is being coached on something, from the rep to the supervisor to the manager to leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that we've talked about a lot of great things that I feel like any organization that wants to improve their coaching can get something out of this. So, number one, thank you. I appreciate you joining us today on Next in Queue. If someone wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about Challenger, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yep. Challenger's website, challengerinc.com, effortlessexperience.com also kind of links to us. And then I could not possibly have an easier last name, so I'll just throw that out there as an email address as well, amy.smith@challengerinc.com. Again, that's amy.smith@challengerinc.com. That would be a very easy way to get in touch. Definitely welcome further conversations, both about coaching, which I am clearly very passionate about, but I'm also very passionate about QA and about rep skills. So I'd be very happy to talk further with anyone on how to change their strategy, and just some thought partnership on different levers to pull.
Wonderful. We'll make sure those links are in the liner notes. So if you didn't catch amy.smith@challengerinc.com, don't worry. We'll put it in the liner notes. Amy, thank you so much for joining. It's been great having you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me and letting me talk about this thing that I've had such lifelong learning about, and I feel like every day I'm learning something new about it. So I very much want organizations to be thinking about, again, just how to build up a really good coaching culture.